I want to write this down before my memory fails me. The thoughts don't come in order anymore, they scatter and crumble the moment I try to hold them. But I need to capture the truth while there's still a part of me left. My name was Daniel Cross. For years, I had a ritual. I'd save every scrap of vacation time from my job and spend a full month each summer alone in the mountains. It was my way of pressing reset, of escaping the endless static of city life. The cabin was 15 miles from the nearest paved road, tucked deep among pines and maples. Behind it stretched a small lake that locals called Hollow Lake, though no one could tell me why. Maybe because of how still it always looked, like the water was waiting for something. The first time I came here, I fell in love with the silence. No cars, no sirens, no screens buzzing with constant alerts. Just the sound of wind in the trees, the creak of wood as the cabin settled, the occasional cry of a hawk circling above the lake. Every year I came back, and every year the ritual worked. I returned to my job refreshed, my mind clear again. 4 or 5 years straight. Nothing went wrong. This year was different. I arrived with the usual excitement, food packed, guitar strapped in the back seat, a stack of books heavy enough to break my shoulder if I carried them wrong. The drive was long, the dirt road bumpier than I remembered. But when I stepped onto the porch and smelled the pine air, I felt the tension of the city fall away. I set about my routine, check the propane tank, stack the firewood, test the radio. The cabin had no internet, no phone service, but the radio connected to the ranger station. I always let them know I'd arrived, though most years I never needed to use it again. The first 2 days were perfect. I woke with the sun, brewed coffee, sat on the porch and strummed the guitar while the mist lifted from the lake. In the afternoons, I hiked the trails, stopping to watch deer grazing in distant clearings. Evenings were for reading by the fire and sipping the bourbon I'd tucked away for special nights. But then the rain came. At first, it was just a light drizzle, a pleasant rhythm against the roof. I didn't mind it, gave me an excuse to stay in and play music. But on the 5th evening, something changed. I was sitting on the porch, guitar balanced on my knee, when I noticed ripples cutting across the water. At first I thought it was the rain, but the drops were scattered, inconsistent, not enough to make the lake move like that. The ripples came in steady patterns, too deliberate, as if something large was circling just beneath the surface. I set the guitar aside and leaned forward, squinting. They're just below the waterline. A pale blur slid across the murk. It never broke the surface, but it was fast, graceful, moving with purpose. The lake was supposed to be empty. The locals had told me years ago it held no fish, no life at all. My chest tightened. I walked closer, boots sinking into the mud at the edge. That's when I saw something else, a film of algae clinging to the shore. Thick, luminous. It shimmered faintly red even in the gray daylight. The smell hit me, then sickly sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. I bent down, almost reaching out before instinct pulled me back. The thing in the water darted deeper, vanishing. The drizzle thickened into rain, and I hurried inside, unsettled but telling myself I was overreacting. I poured a glass of bourbon and stared at the radio on the shelf. I thought about calling the Rangers. But what would I say? There's something swimming in a lake that's supposed to be empty? They'd laugh. Or worse, think I'd been drinking too much. So I kept quiet. That night I dreamed of worms. They writhed in my throat, filling my mouth until I gagged, spilling out in clumps onto the floor no matter how many I spit out. I woke before dawn, gasping, still tasting earth on my tongue. The forest was silent. No birdsong, no squirrels skittering, just rain. For the first time in 5 years, Hollow Lake no longer felt peaceful. It felt like it was watching me. The rain didn't stop the next day. By mid-morning it was coming down hard, hammering the tin roof until I had to raise my voice just to hear myself think. I spent the early hours pacing the cabin, telling myself it was nothing. Lakes ripple, algae grows. Maybe I'd never noticed it before, but the certainty I'd always felt in this place had cracked. And once the crack appeared, it widened with every passing hour. By late afternoon, I'd had enough. I poured another cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and turned on the radio station. This is the cabin off Blackthorn Trail. Do you copy? Static hissed back. I tried again. Station. Do you read me? Over. For nearly a minute. Nothing. I was starting to think no one would answer when the speaker crackled and a voice bled through. Blackthorn. This is Station 14. What can I do for you? Relief surged through me. My finger pressed the button hard enough to ache. Yeah. Something strange is happening out here. There's movement in the lake. Always thought it was empty. But something's swimming around in there. And the shoreline. It looks infected with some kind of red algae. Smells rotten. Doesn't seem normal. Silence. I released the button. Waiting. The static roared in my ear. Then, finally, the voice returned. Flat. Mechanical. I'm sure everything's fine. Blackthorn. I wouldn't worry about it. My gut tightened. I don't think you understand. I said, words tumbling out too quickly. There's never been fish here. Whatever this is, it isn't supposed to be here. And the algaeite's spreading. It's glowing. I really think someone should take a look. The silence stretched again. So long I thought I'd lost the connection. Then the same voice came back. Word for word. Same inflection. Like a recording. I'm sure everything's fine. Blackthorn. I wouldn't worry about it. The hair rose on my arms. Are you sending someone out? I asked, forcing calm. I don't want to sound paranoid, but I'd feel a lot better if a ranger came by. This time the pause lasted nearly a minute. Then, roads are washed out. Stay put until the storm clears. We'll check back soon. I'm sure everything's fine. And just like that, the signal dissolved back into static. I sat frozen, hands still gripping the radio. My coffee had gone cold. Something wasn't right. The repetition, the hollow tone, the lack of any real response didn't sound like a person. It sounded like something else was speaking through the radio, using words it didn't understand. I tried calling back, again and again, but only static answered. That evening, I pulled a chair to the window and sat staring out at the lake. Rain blurred the glass, streaks crawling down like veins. The ripples came again, steady and deliberate, circling across the surface. Every so often, I thought I saw something rise beneath the water, just for a second, a bulge of gray, smooth skin pressing against the surface before sliding back into the depths. I didn't eat dinner, didn't sleep. I sat there until the fire died, watching the rain fall and telling myself I was imagining things. When I finally crawled into bed, I tried to calm myself with the sound of the rain. Steady, familiar, comforting. That was when I heard the first noise. At first it blended with the storm. So faint I thought I was half dreaming. A wet shuffle, like mud being stirred. Then louder, more deliberate. A slithering sound, slick and heavy, dragging closer. My chest seized. I sat up, holding my breath. The noise reached the back door. And then came the slap. A wet, heavy smack against the glass. Loud enough to rattle the frame. I didn't move. Didn't dare breathe. The noise lingered outside the door for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, it receded, slithering back toward the lake. Minutes passed. Then came the splash. I lay awake until morning, every nerve stretched thin, listening to the rain. When daylight finally broke, I crept to the door. A streak of dark sludge smeared across the glass. The patio was coated in the same foul substance, glistening wet and smelling of rot. I gagged, stumbling back. My stomach lurched as bile burned my throat. The forest outside stood too still, too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, only the sound of rain dripping from the trees, as if the whole world was holding its breath. For the first time in my life, the cabin felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. The day dragged by like a sentence. The storm eased to a drizzle in the afternoon, but the silence in the forest remained. Usually, after a night of heavy rain, the woods came alive, birds darting between branches, squirrels chattering as they searched for food, the occasional deer stepping out of the undergrowth. This time, nothing. The air felt too heavy, damp not just with rain, but with something thick, clinging. Every breath seemed to coat my throat, leaving a film of sweetness that made me gag. I spent the morning pacing the cabin, every creak of the floorboards putting me on edge. By midday, I worked up the nerve to step outside. The sludge streak across the glass looked darker now, dried into a crust that caught the weak light. I nudged it with the toe of my boot and instantly regretted its stench rose up, a nauseating mix of spoiled fruit and stagnant water. The lake rippled again. Though the air was still, I forced myself to walk down to the shoreline. The mud squelched under my boots. The red algae had spread overnight, creeping farther into the grass, staining it as though the ground itself were bleeding. I crouched to study it closer, covering my nose with my sleeve. The faint glow beneath its surface pulsed in rhythm with the rain. My stomach turned as I realized it almost seemed to be breathing. Something stirred beneath the water. I snapped my head up. Just beyond the surface, a pale bulge rolled upward before sliding away into the depths. My pulse pounded so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I backed away, nearly slipping in the mud, then hurried inside and slammed the door. The rest of the day, I sat staring out the window, flinching at every shadow. I tried reading, tried strumming the guitar, even tried napping, but the tension never left me. By nightfall, I was a raw nerve, jumpy and brittle. I told myself I'd keep the fire stoked, that the light would help me feel safe. But when the flames dimmed, the sound began again. At first it was faint, buried under the rhythm of the rain, a slick dragging noise, as if something was crawling slowly across the earth. Then louder. The sound scraped closer, squelching wetly in the mud outside. I sat frozen in the armchair, eyes fixed on the back door. My breath came shallow, chest locked tight. The noise reached the patio. Slap. The glass rattled in its frame. My hands trembled as I gripped the arms of the chair. My mouth went dry. I couldn't bring myself to stand. Couldn't even think to grab the rifle I kept in the bedroom closet. I just sat there, helpless. The slithering continued, circling the cabin, dragging its weight across the walls. Every creak of the wood made me flinch. The smell seeped inside the same sickly sweetness of rot. Then, silence. I dared to exhale. My muscles sagged in shaky relief. And then, with a sound like wet ropes sliding over wood, it moved again, this time retreating. I stood slowly, forcing myself to the window. I saw nothing but darkness and rain. My ears strained, waiting. Finally, faint and distant, came the splash of something sliding back into the lake. I didn't move again until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the trees. When I stepped outside, my boots sank into the muck of the patio. A thick trail of slime streaked across the boards, still wet, glistening. The glass door was smeared with fresh filth. I gagged. While rising, I staggered back into the cabin and slammed the door shut. That day, I didn't leave. I kept the rifle by my side, pacing from window to window. By afternoon, the forest felt wrong in new ways. The colors seemed brighter than they should be, greens too sharp, shadows too deep. My vision swam, the edges of objects bending as if the world itself was shifting. When the rain eased, I caught sight of movement at the tree line. Squirrels. Relief flickered, but it lasted only a second. Their bodies were wrong, their legs bent at unnatural angles, bones pressing against skin. Their tails dragged long, stringy, twitching in spasms. Eyes bulged grotesquely, too big for their heads, shining wet in the dim light. They watched me. A chorus of clicks and broken chirps filled the silence. The sounds were jarring, wrong, almost like laughter. I slammed the curtains shut. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the scent of rot. I couldn't eat, couldn't drink, couldn't stop shaking. By nightfall, I was unraveling. The rain returned with a vengeance, pounding the roof. And beneath it, the sound began again, wet, slithering, growing louder, closer, filling my skull until I pressed my palms hard against my ears. Something heavy slapped against the glass door, rattling the frame. Another hit followed, then another. The wood groaned as if it might splinter. I stumbled back, rifle in hand, but my knees buckled. My head throbbed, vision blurring. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the faint crackle of the radio. Just hang tight. Blackthorn. We'll be coming for you soon. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even turned it on. The voice repeated, flat and hollow. I'm sure everything's fine. Plants grow. Fish swim. I wouldn't worry about it. The words looped again and again until they were indistinguishable from the sound outside, until I couldn't tell where the voice ended and the slithering began. My mind fractured. I fell to the floor, rifle slipping from my hands, and the world dissolved into darkness. When I came to, daylight poured through the curtains in a pale, sickly wash. My head throbbed. My ears still rang with echoes of the night before. The fire had burned out. The air inside the cabin was damp, heavy, thick with the smell of mildew and rot. My hands trembled as I reached for the radio. The speaker was silent now, nothing but static, though the button to power it off didn't respond anymore. I forced myself to eat something crackers, jerky though it tasted like sawdust in my mouth. The cold hadn't left me since the night before. I piled wood into the fireplace and lit it, but even with the flames dancing high, I couldn't feel warmth. It was as if the heat couldn't reach me anymore. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. I packed my bag in a frenzy. A change of clothes, the remaining food, a flashlight, the rifle. My hands shook so violently I dropped the bullets twice before managing to stuff them into my jacket pocket. By noon, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I stepped outside and locked the cabin behind me, though I knew the lock meant nothing. The trees swayed in the damp wind, but not like normal trees. Their trunks seemed to expand and contract, like the rise and fall of a chest. The forest was breathing. I forced myself to look away, eyes fixed on the path that wound toward where I'd left my car. The mud sucked at my boots with every step. My suitcase felt heavier than it should, like the earth itself was trying to drag me back. The forest groaned around me, branches creaking in a rhythm too steady, too alive. I kept walking, faster. My heart pounded in my chest. That was when I saw them. The squirrels. Dozens of them lined up along the tree line, motionless, watching me. Their bodies were grotesque. Bones bulged beneath stretched skin, legs twisted at impossible angles. Their eyes were swollen, bulging, wet with an unnatural sheen. Their tails writhed like worms, too long, dragging through the mud. One of them let out a click, high-pitched and staccato. Another answered, a broken chirp that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The sound spread among them, a chorus of distorted laughter. I broke into a run. The forest blurred around me. The path twisted, mud splattering my legs. My suitcase banged against my thigh with every step. My lungs burned as though the air itself was too thick to breathe. At last, I saw the clearing. Relief's Surgeon car sat just ahead, waiting like salvation. But the relief shattered the moment I reached it. The car was destroyed. Both front windows smashed, tires shredded and flat, rims sunk into the mud. The hood stood open, its guts ripped out and scattered across the clearing like entrails. I dropped to my knees, mud soaking my jeans. My chest heaved as I stared at the wreckage. My only way out gone. The sound came then. That horrible, off-key chorus of chirps and clicks, rising from the tree line. I turned. The squirrels still watched, teeth bared in grotesque smiles, their eyes wide with something too close to amusement. The noise grew louder, more jagged, until it sounded like laughter filling the forest. I staggered to my feet and stumbled backward, suitcase forgotten in the mud. Tears burned my eyes as I turned and ran, branches whipping my face, the earth pulsing beneath my boots. I didn't stop until I reached the cabin again, lungs screaming for air. My hands fumbled with the key, finally forcing the door open. I slammed it shut behind me, bolted the locks, and collapsed against the wall. The rain had returned in full force, hammering the roof, but it couldn't drown out the other sound. The slithering. It was closer than ever. I forced myself to the window, rifle clutched tight. My hands trembled so badly I could barely hold it steady. At first I saw nothing but rain and darkness. Then the lightning flashed, and I saw it, dragging itself from the lake, tendrils writhing, a vast slick body pulsing with unnatural life. Its surface shimmered with slime, insect-like eyes bulging across its mass. But it wasn't just one thing. In the brief flash of lightning, I saw fragments of other shapes bleeding through like reality itself was fracturing under its presence. A deer, its legs sprouting from its torso, joints bent backward. A withered woman, naked and bleeding, worms spilling from her mouth as she grinned. Myself, kneeling in the mud, vomiting earth and smiling as though I enjoyed it. They weren't separate visions. They were the same moment, layered and overlapping. Too much for my mind to comprehend. Blood leaked from my ears. My nose burned with it. My vision swam red. I stumbled back, screaming, slamming the curtains shut. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wall, the rifle slipping from my hands. The sound pressed in from all sides, slithering, squelching, burrowing into my skull until I collapsed onto the floor, hands clamped over my ears. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the wet slap of something heavy against the cabin wall and the faint, steady hum of the radio. When I woke, daylight seeped through the curtains, though it brought no comfort. The light was pale, washed out, sickly. My head felt as if a hammer had struck me again and again through the night. My ears still rang with the memory of that sound, that endless slithering noise. I dragged myself upright. My clothes clung damp against my skin, though I couldn't remember sweating. My eyes stung. When I touched my face, my fingers came away smeared with dried blood from my nose and ears. The radio was still humming. I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. But its speaker crackled softly, whispering through the static. Just hang tight. Blackthorn. We'll be coming for you soon. I stared at it, bile burning in my throat. The voice looped again. Flat. Hollow. I'm sure everything's fine. Plants grow. Fish swim. I wouldn't worry about it. The phrases repeated with mechanical precision. Always the same rhythm. The same tone. I grabbed the radio and shook it, slammed it against the table. It wouldn't turn off. The voice never stopped. The sound burrowed into my mind, fusing with the memory of the slithering outside. I pressed my palms against my ears until they ached. But nothing could shut it out. The air inside the cabin was worse now. Thick, cloying. The sweet rot of the algae, of the sludge smeared across the patio door, had seeped into the walls. I lit the fireplace again, fed it every stick of what I had left. But no warmth came. I crouched close, almost pressing my hands into the flames. And still the cold gnawed at me. I stumbled to the window and pulled back the curtain. The forest stared back. Every branch seemed too sharp, every color too vivid, like I was looking at a photograph overexposed. The trees swayed not with the wind, but in a slow rhythm, expanding and contracting like lungs. Their bark pulsed with veins of red. I jerked the curtain shut, shaking, when I caught sight of my reflection in the glass. I froze. My skin looked pale, too pale, almost gray. My eyes seemed darker, as if the pupils had spread wider than they should, swallowing color. My lips trembled. I couldn't look any longer. I didn't want to see myself. The days blurred. I lost track of time. I tried to write, to anchor myself, but the words slid away, scattered like leaves before I could grasp them. The worms returned every time I closed my eyes. I could feel them crawling inside my throat, inside my stomach, writhing through me as though I were nothing but soil. The forest pressed closer. At night, branches scraped the windows. The ground shuddered with every breath of the trees. The slithering always came with the rain, louder each time, circling the cabin for hours. Sometimes I heard the wet slap of something against the glass, against the walls, testing for weakness. I kept the rifle beside me, but even its weight brought no comfort. What use was lead against something that could bend reality, against something that could twist the very air I breathed? One evening, the rain hammered down so hard I thought the roof would collapse. I sat trembling by the fire, half asleep, when a knock jolted me upright. Not a slap, not a slither, a knock. 3 sharp raps against the door. My heart lurched into my throat. Slowly, I raised the rifle, my hands trembling so violently I could barely keep it aimed. Another knock, and then a voice. Blackthorn. It's Station 14. Open up. My breath caught. For a split second, hope surged. But then I heard it. The same rhythm. The same tone. Word for word. The exact cadence as the radio. Blackthorn. It's station 14. Open up. The voice repeated, over and over, until the words blurred into meaningless sound. I screamed, shoving the chair against the door, pressing my weight against it until my legs gave out. The voice stopped. The slithering began again. I blacked out on the floor, rifle clutched to my chest, the radio still whispering in the dark. When I woke, hoarser, maybe days had passed. My body felt heavier, as if gravity itself had thickened. My veins burned cold. My reflection in the window was worse. My skin blotched with faint red lines that seemed to move if I stared too long. The worms weren't just in my dreams anymore. I could feel them crawling under my skin, burrowing deeper. I realized then that escape wasn't possible. The car was gone. The forest twisted. The road washed away. And worse than all of it, I was changing.